Well, good afternoon and welcome to MedTech Crossroads. It apparently is fall. It snuck up on us, but here it is, Friday, September 23rd, the 121st episode of MedTech Crossroads. We are glad that you are here with us. We're going to give you a little bit of news that's happening locally. Conference season is ramping up. Things are happening. We're back to in person. It's kind of amazing. It's really cool. And what our show is going to be about today, right after the local news, is one that just happened September 20th. We've been telling you about it all summer long, but in just a few minutes I'm going to be joined by Stephen Rapundalo from MichBio, who's going to be telling us all about the summit that a number of us were just at on September 20th. We had over 55 companies represented there. It was a great time. We're going to take you through what happened during that day this past Tuesday. But first, to tell you about a couple of upcoming events. Ford Field's going to be a busy place coming up in a couple of weeks, and then again in November. In November, the MedHealth Summit is coming to Ford Field in Detroit. That should be a great event. It's going to be at the Hall of Legends. Healthcare innovators, providers, healthcare systems, investors. They do some speed dating that's pretty cool, so we are looking forward to that on November 1st. On October 12th, and Jeff Reinfeldt has come on in recent weeks to tell us about this, Renaissance Venture Partners is holding the Undemo Day back in person at Ford Field on October 12th. This is going to be part of that Michigan Tech Week that's happening, and it's going to be a great event. It's actually the period for startups to apply to it is closed now, so you're past that deadline. But you can still go, just as a member of the public. You can go. You can hear a lot of what's happening there. You can scan that QR code if you would like to attend. So it should be a great event as well. And we've been showing you this slide for the last number of months. This is now not a save the date anymore. This has already happened. But the Michigan Medical Device Summit, and joining me to talk all about the event that we were just at this past Tuesday is Stephen Rapundalo, who heads up MichBio. Welcome, Stephen.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to see you again twice in a week.
Indeed.
We've got a little picture up here from the show. I actually was hoping to do lots more of on-site video. That didn't happen because it was so packed. I told you afterwards, wow, we should have done this over 2 days, and I know that's a much bigger event, but you just jam-packed it into the agenda. I had to put this up there just to give you grief. You know, there's our fearless leader of MichBio, Stephen Rapundalo, up there on stage, leading us on the conference recordings. Tell us just a bit about this, Stephen.
Well, the whole conference, all the sessions were recorded, and we should have those available to share with the attendees and also to those who couldn't be with us. Those will be available for purchase individually or in total, probably middle to end of next week.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
There's the address there, MichBio.org. And what we're going to do today is we're just going to go through that agenda. Oftentimes folks don't know what happens at a conference like this, and so we've taken the agenda, and Stephen, you and I are just going to sort of reminisce about some of the highlights from that day as we go through that. And then if somebody's interested in hearing the details, they can go hopefully next week to MichBio.org, and they can get access to whatever sessions they're interested in. So this was over in Kalamazoo. Tell us just a little bit about the venue.
Yeah, so we were at the downtown Kalamazoo Radisson Plaza Hotel. Phenomenal venue. It's unlike any Radisson that I've ever been at anywhere in this country. It's really high end, and they always have provided a awesome facility, great support and service. So we love going there. The space really fits us very nicely, and we've had much bigger events there. But for the purposes of this year's summit, we are very kind of purposeful in how we structured the event in terms of, and we had everything contained by and large in the main ballroom, meaning not only sessions, certainly the general sessions, some of the breakouts, but we also had the exhibitors and the resource tables and folks who were in the technology showcase also there. So it was all very contained. And then we had simultaneous breakouts, and the other breakout track was downstairs. But it was very very convenient. And we went there because back in 2019, when we had our first one, that of course was in Grand Rapids. You know that, you were there. You know, we were fortunate to host the head of the FDA's medical device division, Jeff Shuren. And then you know what happened in the intervening year or two. So last year's event was virtual. This year, folks wanted to get back in person, but in May, when we normally would hold this event, not everybody was ready or had lifted their COVID travel restrictions, so the event got pushed off to September. And we decided to do it in Kalamazoo because there's a good hub of MedTech activity there, not the least of which because Stryker obviously has a big presence there.
That's their home place, yeah. Well, and I thought just as an attendee, I thought that you hit exactly the right size and everything, because it's easy to either underreach or overreach. But as everyone's sort of getting used to these in-person events, I feel like we had to relearn how to shake hands. You know, this was the training wheels level back again.
And trust me, a lot of people don't appreciate what goes on behind the scenes to plan for these kinds of events. And certainly, again, the design, the layout of the event was, we spent many hours trying to figure that one out. And we also really didn't know what kind of attendance we would or would not have. And I can certainly tell you that there was plenty of folks who were still hesitant to come back and attend in person, even if masked. And we had a diversity of folks at the event. Some were masked, some were not. So it does, logistically, it does provide some challenges as we plan these things. So,
but it was really, really cool, because I just felt like during the whole day, it was just, you went from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. And in the intervening holes, I felt like it was like renewing old acquaintances, meeting new people. It was absolutely jam-packed. Like you said, Kalamazoo, a great venue. We were joined at the beginning by Representative Julie Rogers from Kalamazoo, and I think that itself was very appropriate. Turns out she's a practicing clinician as well as a state representative.
Yeah, she's a physical therapist by training. Still does that in addition to her legislative role. She's been a very big champion for the life sciences industry. And so we've worked closely with her. We'll probably be working even more closely come January. And when the legislature there'll be many new faces. So having somebody like her with, historical knowledge of who we are and the value and benefit that we bring, not only to health, but to economy, is critical. So, it was worthwhile having her there, because I think our industry needs to recognize people like that who are in positions to influence on behalf of our industry.
Yeah, well, and of course, MichBio, something that you guys do heavily is that interface, that liaising with the regulator, or sorry, with the folks from City Hall to Washington, D.C., right? The lobbying and other types of things. Well, we went from that to a real powerhouse session, C-Suite Unplugged. And this was, I love how you titled this, Managing MedTech Company Growth During Extreme Uncertainty. And none of these guys, led by Kevin McLeod on the right there as our moderator from C2DX, Eric Sklar from NuStep, Brad Saar from Stryker Medical, Nate Folkert from Orchid Orthopedics. These guys didn't really pull any punches. I mean, we've got things like supply chain, we've got staffing uh, issues, we've got changes in the overall landscape.
Mhm.
Give us a couple highlights here. This was really a great session.
Well, so this is has always been one of our more popular types of sessions, and we've done it not just for the med device sector, but we've done it even at our prior expos in various with various focus. Um, the idea behind these C-suite sessions is, like you alluded to, is to get these senior executives to be candid about how they view the overall sector marketplace, and what are the challenges that they're dealing with. And in choosing each one of these, again, we were very purposeful. We wanted to make sure that there was sort of a representation from the diversity of the medtech sector. So, here you had Brad Saar, the president of Stryker Medical, so major OEM. Then you had Nate Folkert, who relatively new CEO of Orchid Orthopedics, which is a major contract manufacturer. They're headquartered here. They're all over the world. I think they've got well over 2,000 employees. And then you had Eric Sklar from about 100-person size company, small OEM, based in Ann Arbor. So very different types of companies. Orchid and NuStep being private equity owned, so that brought an interesting dimension. And like you said, the idea was to kind of hear them talk about these macro, issues, and there certainly was no shortage of them, right? I mean, as you said, there was supply chain and issues about reshoring, or even something as fundamental as how has the healthcare delivery model, evolved or is evolving, and what does that mean for them in terms of their business models, and now how they've had to pivot and adapt and adjust to keep their market positions. But yes, I mean, talent retention and recruitment, labor issues were top of mind.
Yeah, I felt like about
So,
halfway through that session, I was just like, wow, this is really good therapy for anyone who is in a business or running a business right about this time. Because these guys, I mean, they weren't saying, hey, anything fatalistic or anything like that, but just some of the real challenges, and just to hear somebody from these different sizes of companies acknowledge this is actually the environment we're in right now, and we're pressing forward in it. It was it was actually unexpectedly inspiring, which I think would be a great thing for a
well,
lot of folks.
and again, that's purposeful. That's exactly how we approach them and say, look, this is how we'd like you to, to convey. And if you recall, Eric was particularly honest about the sort of, the other two were faring not too badly. Eric's company, unfortunately, has sort of ridden the waves like Peloton has. And so while things were great during the early days of the pandemic, now things are much more challenging. And he was speaking to what that's like, and what keeps them awake at night and so forth. So hopefully that kind of thing resonates with whoever in the audience, whether you're a big company, small company, you're a contract, or you're an OEM, or you're a supplier. I mean, that's really the point of that session. It's designed to kind of speak to each and everyone who's sitting there listening.
Yeah, it was really phenomenal. I think I was surprised to come away as inspired as I did from that, with just sort of a dose of, yeah, this is the environment we're in. So that'd be a great one for anyone who's involved in running a company, almost at any level. I think next up we had this developing product for the healthcare market of the future, and this one we had Sanjeev Agarwal from a Biomed on the left there, William Fluharty from Stryker, Frank Saltiel from Borges Heart Institute, and then Timothy Durst from Accenture was moderating it on the right. This one got really fascinating, Stephen, because of a lot of the complexities that are coming into, like, standardization is supposed to make the world a better place, but at the same time, standardization kind of makes for more complex products. This was fascinating.
Yeah, well, so like with the first session, like I said, we wanted to kind of, have those senior execs take a look at the bigger picture and try to distill, what's going on for them down to sort of daily type and operational challenges. In this next session, the transformative MedTech one, we thought we would sort of flip that and try to have a discussion of, okay, what's changing, and let's look down the road a bit, and what do we see, and what is that going to mean for technology development, product development? What is that going to mean for design? What's that going to mean for patient outcomes, and so forth? And so, here also these the panelists were rather interesting. Tim Durst, long time in the field, actually a Kettering University alum, but works at Accenture and sees many different types of companies in the medtech space. So really knows the field well. Dr. Agarwal was interesting because, yes, he's at a biomed, but he was most recently at Beaumont Health, practicing cardiologist, and a pretty esteemed one at that. And then Frank Saltiel, also a cardiologist, which was totally by coincidence that we had two cardiologists on the same panel. But his the other interesting aspect about him was that he is an entrepreneur and innovator. He's been a part of at least one company, has a new one right now. And then of course, you had Bill Fluharty, who's the director of design over at Stryker, kind of bringing the R&D product development perspective. And so they also kind of talked about, what kind of technologies are disrupting the traditional, models and processes. How do future products need to leverage, data and evidence, and so that can be most impactful for patient outcomes. How are companies embedding or integrating user experience and that patient centricity, excuse me. That the old traditional business model and product development model is not going to be enough anymore. It's no longer just selling a product, and in fact, it's no longer just providing or selling a work solution. Now you're going to have all this, integration and interoperability and data and so forth. And how do you derive value from it for you as the company, but also for the customers you serve, whether it's the provider and or the patient? So it was really a fascinating kind of look at the future of healthcare.
Yeah, that was also a really cool one, because I think even in the last, say, 10 years, how people think about where products are going and how they're being acquired, either the company being acquired or the product being acquired by a healthcare system, or the standards they have to comply with and the interoperability. It's all just changing so fast. That was a great session. Well, the next one, and these were a couple of breakouts here, but one that a lot of companies don't know about, and even we've had to look at ourselves. We had this was Michelle Sipa and Robin LeBlanc from Monitech talking about some of the tax incentives that are out there. I think a lot of companies don't understand that if they kept their employees retained during COVID, we're not talking about PPP loans here. If you kept your employees retained during COVID, but you had some hardships, there's actually more federal dollars out there that might be accessible to you.
Yeah, so that, they basically spoke to two sort of general incentives. One was the one you just mentioned, and it's the acronym is the Employee Credit Retention Program. Yeah, so ECRP. And then the other one is the R&D tax credit, because you can get those both at a federal level and in many states at the state level. And in fact, I had we were both at the MDMM West show in Anaheim in April, the big medical technology, medical product supplier showcase. And that's where I came across this company. And much to my surprise, they were based here in Michigan. And I was, just like, well, what are you doing here? And I thought I knew R&D tax credits, but I turns out I don't, because it's not just for folks that are in R&D. It could be for suppliers. It could be really for all sorts of types of companies, depending on, the nature of what you do and how you do it. And so I thought, this is something that needs to be imparted on our community. And since these folks were based right here, it was easy to get them out to come and talk about it. And yeah, it was fascinating.
That was a great
I think
session. The questions were flying during that one. Everyone was like, wait, I didn't know about this.
well, when there's a smell of free money, why not, right?
Yeah, if it's there. I think at one point a couple of months ago, I had heard that some 70% of the, what do we call it, ECRP funds were unclaimed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this was another one. Talk about the labor retention challenges that people are facing. Stryker Medical, I'm going to mispronounce her name here, Bakasiak, Zach Brown from Epredia, Angie Rohr from Orchid, and Patrick Emerson from Kelly Science, who was the moderator on the right there. Tell us a little bit about what they said for employee retention. This is a challenge now. People can work remotely. They can go get a job on the West Coast from Kalamazoo.
Yeah, well, again, this has been an issue that's been highlighted time and time again. It came up at our MedTech committee meetings. And so our little planning group was very much keen on having this session front and center. And unfortunately, I was in the R&D tax credit breakout that was going on at the same time, so I didn't pop into the HR one, but I hear it was packed because it's an issue that every company or every organization, big or small, whatever type of line of work you're in, is faced with. And so everybody wants to hear, what are some of the best practices or novel ideas, or, what have you tried, what worked, what didn't. And that's basically what this session was meant to get out of it. And, they talked about, compensation practices, how have they changed recruitment approaches, where are they going to look that they didn't look before. They talked about, partnering and growing relationships with the supply side, namely the academic institutions. They really span quite a diverse set of topics within, the framework of talent recruitment and retention.
Yeah, very cool too to have somebody from Stryker, as well as folks who are in Orchid, as well as folks who are working sort of in the employee recruitment space outside of companies like that. Very, very neat.
Well, again, we tried to make sure that there was a diversity of the type of company, right? And I should point out that Epredia, most people would probably know them by their prior ownership, and that was Thermo Fisher. But they're a small company there in Kalamazoo. The facility in Kalamazoo is small, but Epredia itself is much larger. So we had very different vantage points by each of these different speakers. So
that was a great lineup. This is really interesting. Metacred had a breakout, which is it's a fascinating idea. As I talked to these guys, Bob especially, who at some point we'll probably have on the show to talk more about this. Sounds like what they're doing is going out, and this isn't like your quality system itself. This is more like, hey, if you're doing some technical subdiscipline that is a consequence of your quality system or something sort of downstream from your quality system, like say injection molding, they're going to come in and audit you on, are you doing injection molding well, and then give that kind of a certification so that you don't have to go through quite as much auditing with folks who are like, well, we think you could injection mold, but we need to come audit you to find out. It's a neat model. They're really trying to break into that space.
Yeah, and again, that's I picked up on that at the MDMM West show as part of their educational sessions, and uh, we know that a number of big OEMs, certainly Stryker, are increasingly wanting their suppliers to have this kind of accreditation. And the Michigan Manufacturing Technology Center, MMTC, which is where Bob Jenkins um, works at, is the one who's been, going around to suppliers primarily and trying to educate them on this program. And surprisingly, of the companies that have acquired this accreditation, many of them are actually here in Michigan. If you look at those from across the country, and then Justin Justin McCabe, right?
McCabe, yep.
McCabe. Yep. He's actually the overall Metacred program director. So he came out of Pittsburgh to speak and really provided a very nice, overview about what it's all about and what the benefits and value can be for suppliers, whether they be, like you said, injection molders or electronics, or I mean, you name it.
Yeah, that was really cool what they're trying to do. And of course, as we get more and more, it's one of the cool things about standardization as you get down to some of the details where a technology or something matures, you can actually now have the opportunity to do this kind of a, hey, yeah, this is a relatively mature field. Let's show people whether you're doing this well
Mm-hmm.
or not, which I think is really cool to see. Intellectual property was not left out. You had Thomas Moga from Dykema and Kristen Persley from DeBrusen. They had a really cool session on building an IP portfolio. I don't know if I've ever heard a presentation quite as succinct and nice. I mean, I've worked with startups for years and I've managed IP portfolios, so I'm familiar with these things. And a really nice hour-long nugget on intellectual property and how to think about it, including international. Which, oh my goodness, your head
Yeah.
starts to spin when you start to think about that.
Well, yeah, and those two are great. They actually are co-chairs of our IP and legal committee, and so yeah, I mean IP protection, right? It's not the sexiest of subject matter, but it's an essential one for all companies, whether you're an innovator or even if you're it could be a supplier, because again, unbeknownst to many, they perhaps don't always realize that what they're making has some value and should be protected as such. So Kristen kind of focused mostly on the domestic side, and Tom, who spends most of his every day working on the international scene, provided those perspectives. And you're right. I mean, boy, there was a hell of a lot of information there that they packaged into an hour. And hopefully people walked out much more, informed in terms of the how-tos and the why don'ts and so forth. So
Yeah, very, very useful stuff. And oftentimes people they don't even have that overview. I know if I hadn't worked as an IP portfolio manager inside of a startup, I would never have gotten the crash course I did. So to have that kind of a thing is really important. This was cool. You had the investors there. Obviously, so Rob Ball on the left there, Genesis Innovation Group CEO, Eli Thompson from Adler. I mean, Eli's been doing this for ages. I talked to him afterwards, and he said, he thought he was done, but he's going back in again with Adler. But obviously, a great veteran CEO, and he's had a pretty big exit. I know relatively recently. Jeff Wesley, executive director of Red Cedar Ventures and the Rise Fund, and then Jason Gorek from J.P. Morgan Chase you brought on. This was a cool session.
yeah, again, we wanted representatives from different vantage points in the investment chain. So with Jason there from J.P. Morgan, they kind of sit there and have that world view And while they're mostly, interfacing with larger companies, those larger companies are keeping an eye on the new and up and coming technologies and startups. And so that puts them in a very good position, JP Morgan, that is, in knowing who's who and what's what, and in the investment marketplace. And then, with Red Cedar Ventures, Jeff provides that very, very early seed and stage type of perspective. Like you said, Eli's been around, been there, done that so many times in the medtech space. And then Rob, interesting, both an investor, but also entrepreneur. His group is behind Shoulder Innovations, a nice up and coming early stage company in the Grand Rapids, Holland area. And so they really kind of shed light on, what's the marketplace looking like these days? What's the deal flow and the activity? What are the prospects for fundraising? How have those been changed and impacted by the pandemic? Are there certain therapeutic areas or technology spaces that are, of greater interest to the investment world than others? So they kind of dived into a lot of those issues. That was another great session.
Yeah, that was phenomenal. There was another one. I know I didn't get to attend this one, but this was from Mark Durovich, who's with Quality Systems Compliance, proposed changes to 21 CFR 820 quality management system regulation. Of course, FDA has been, oh my, it's always up and down, and there's always something they want to do there. Some of that is legal changes that have to be made at a federal level. Some can be implemented on the ground, but again, great content to have there at the session.
Yeah, and again, that was another one that I had come across at the MDMM West show. Mark was there with another presenter, along with a representative from the American Association of Medical Instrumentation, or AMI, which is a standards type of organization. And and what struck me about that session, which was the very practical, how practically focused it was, how it really brought down. A lot of times you go to these regulatory type sessions and sometimes you walk out going, okay, well, how does that really relate to my operations? The session that I saw was very different in that it was really, okay, boots on the ground. Here's what's going to happen. Here's what you got to do. This is how you have to plan. And then it was a surprise for me to learn that Mark is based here in Michigan. And so I said, can you replicate this session, for us at the summit? And so he did. So that was a very good session too. Yeah.
This comes back to the topic that I know we talked about sort of at the end of the thing of just even knowing who's here in the state, and it's an ongoing task and challenge to bring these people and bring them to the fore. And it's kind of why we're doing what we're doing today. Is if somebody said, "Oh, I know there was a summit, but I don't really know what happened there." Hey, these people are accessible. These sessions are accessible. We're just making a little index here, and it's a great way to bring some of it up.
Yeah.
There was another session. I couldn't bring myself to bear to put my picture up there, but thank you for including me in this one, Stephen. It's the people see enough of me though. It's beyond. It's beyond. But Josh Kaplan from SLI Medical, another company that, wow, didn't know they exist, but really cool. I'll have you tell us about them in just a minute. Of course, Jim Metzger, Keystone Solutions Group, President and CEO. They're great West Michigan turnkey developer and manufacturer. Tom O'Mara from AutoCAM. And then Mark Ignash from MEDC led the session. This was a lot of fun for me. I just had a blast talking with these guys. Tell us a bit about each of them, though, because I think Josh's company really, really fascinating.
Yeah, well, let me just take a step back first and kind of speak to why we had this particular session. In our prior two summits, as you know, I would say they were a little bit more traditional in the sense that, if you go to some of the national meetings like the MedTech conference or whatever, there's, plenty of regulatory and what's the latest and greatest. There's, um, uh, and our two prior summits were kind of structured like that. Um, and when planning this one, the organizing committee really wanted to kind of tie things and bring it back to Michigan. What do we have here? We certainly over time have heard many comments about, well, I don't know what's here, and if I need a supplier or I need this, who do I go to talk to and find out? And so we thought that a session focused a little bit more inward about what the medtech ecosystem in Michigan is all about. How do we, what do we need to do to sustain it, make it as robust as it possibly can, strengthen its connectivity and network so that we, because basically, as you know, Gene, there's pretty much everything
That's
here
right. Yep.
for a company to be able to leverage everything from idea to market. But a lot of times we're hearing, I'm sure you've heard it, oh, I've gone to California or wherever, and it's like, why didn't you just go down the street and knock on so and so? Oh, well, we didn't know they exist.
That's right.
So this session was kind of to talk about all of that and hear about what the opportunities are, what the challenges are, what do we have to do collectively to really create a much more resilient ecosystem that's going to benefit everybody.
Yeah, it was a fun session. Really, obviously AutoCAM doing amazing precision machining work on medical devices. Keystone, obviously turnkey, designed to manufacturing.
Well, and I couldn't resist it with Tom O'Mara. He's been at AutoCAM for almost 30 years. I mean, he's like the guru out there in the contract medtech manufacturing space here in Michigan. He's seen that, he's been there, done that all. And so he's retiring at the end of the year, and I couldn't resist trying to get him in, and so he could lend his wisdom and sage advice, to the conversation. And then you mentioned Josh. So that was just a very recent discovery, if you will, on my part. I knew one of his people, and a question for an introduction to another one of our companies came across my desk, and in the due course, I learned about who they are and what they do, and they're clearly in the distribution space, although they also do some contract manufacturing. But I thought it would be very useful to have Josh as part of the panel because he is in that distribution stage. He's at the very end of the, before market in the entire, ecosystem process, which you don't typically get to hear from. And so I sort of cajoled him to participate because he was certainly very, very involved in the early days of the pandemic here in trying to stock, medical products for the hospitals, for the state of Michigan, and so forth. So he was very knowledgeable about logistics and distribution, which I thought, we can't forget about that aspect of the entire supply chain.
Yeah, what a knowledgeable guy, and also like running straight into the supply chain questions. Like, is it not even like, oh, woe is me? He's like charging right into these supply chain issues.
Extremely knowledgeable, and he has a global network at his fingertips. And so, wow, what a resource to have and to know. And yeah, I mean, and it points to, the diversity as well as the breadth of of what the medtech ecosystem in Michigan is all about. I mean, it never ceases to amaze me that, not a week goes by and I'm finding another gem, like a SLI or a Mark Duravage or whoever. And it's like, where have you been? How come we've never crossed paths?
Well,
Amazing.
it's so fun, Stephen, because I think I told you years ago, near the time we first met, that one of your great talents is connecting people, and you continue to do that, and doing it in national and international ways as
I
well.
remember that. We did that in San Jose at the MedTech conference.
My,
However, many
and your
years ago.
memory is perfect as well. Oh, it was a great conference. Startups there as well. Your
And if I
sponsors.
can,
Oh yeah,
yep, and if
please.
I can, well, if I put in a plug for, yeah, and we had these three tech showcase. They got a lot of traction. People stopped by their tables to see their up and coming technologies. It was really nice to have them as well as all the different exhibitors and suppliers who showed off their products and services. Yeah.
Yeah, it was great.
I
Obviously.
just I
Oh, go
I
ahead.
just
Yep.
wanted to add one last thing, and well, of course, thank you to our sponsors. But future events, we've got a digital health forum coming up on
Mhm.
October 4th. That's on our website, and also to your listeners, because you've gone to this event, and of course, that's the MedTech conference that's put on by AdvaMed in Boston at the end of October. I think, if you're an OEM of whatever size, you should be there. But I was also put a plug in to the early stage companies because, as you know, they have a great forum for early stage companies. There's a partnering section there that early stage companies can leverage in terms of investors or strategics. And then above all, it's a very, very manageable, small, big conference, right? And the beauty is that a lot of those senior executives, and I mean, we're talking the CEOs of Medtronic and Stryker and Boston Scientific, they come and they stay and they're all approachable. Um, you can't beat that kind of access. And so if anybody's in the medtech community, that's definitely um, an event to go to. And as a MichBio member, you're eligible for a discount to that conference. So
Yeah, great conference. One we've been to multiple years. Planning to go again this year. It's the MedTech conference by AdvaMed, and I know you're the one who turned me on to that organization in general. I think it was through one of the legislative fly-in days, actually, that I accompanied you on out to DC, which was an eye-opening experience beyond eye-opening experiences. That was just phenomenal. Yeah, it's a great thing to remind folks of. Tried to throw, I think I got all but maybe one on here. 55 companies represented.
oh, good Lord.
Yeah, it was great, Stephen. It was wonderful, which is why we wanted to do this overview so that the fact you do have all the sessions recorded. If anything we said here today is interesting to folks, they can go to michbio.org and find those recordings in a week or two.
Yeah, and I'll point out that, as I said earlier, we had to shift this due to sort of COVID related circumstances. It'll be back. We're pretty sure it'll be back next May, and it's regularly allotted time. And we're probably looking at doing it over in the east side of the state, central or east side of the state. So,
Well, we won't be complaining, but being over here on the east side, but it really was great. Great venue, great place. So we're very appreciative. I know at the end you concluded with some MichBio news. Give you just a second here to talk
oh,
about what's happening with
yeah.
MichBio as an organization.
Well, I did take the last half hour of that event to kind of wrap up because I wanted to take some of the things that were discussed during the day and turn them into some actionable activities or tasks. I know there was some mention about trade organizations elsewhere, and so I tried to kind of describe, who we are and what we're capable of relative to some of the others. So we talked a little bit about, excuse me, what other things we could be doing on behalf of or for the medtech sector in terms of programming and so forth. We we talked a little bit about benchmarking efforts. This was raised again at our MedTech committee. They'd like to take things like the HR session and focus on workforce and talent and try to get some more quantitative information about compensation practices and so forth that could be shared and accessed by companies. And so I was talking about, what other types of benchmarking areas should we be focusing on as well. And then I also touched on the fact that it's time that we updated the statewide strategic plan for growing the industry. And so we're going to be embarking on that towards the end of the year, the beginning of 23, through focus groups and so forth. And we'll be touching, reaching out to companies of all kinds to kind of gather their thoughts about what we, and I mean the collective we, public, private, nonprofits like us should be doing to support and grow the overall industry, including the MedTech sector. And then lastly, there was, and certainly in your session, talk about that connectivity and knowing who's who. We are building an outsourcing handbook or directory, if you will, with that would include not only who's who and where they are, but what are their assets and capabilities, what kind of accreditation, certification, registrations, and so forth. It's modeled after what My Device in Grand Rapids has done for its, I think, 2 or 3 dozen companies, but we're expanding that initially for all the 300-400 so-called MedTech companies as defined by the federal NEXT codes, but ultimately across all MedTech suppliers, so that somebody could easily determine if they're the companies into metal extrusion or injection molding or machining or you name it, and be able to kind of look that up quickly, drop a short list, and then make their inquiries of whomever and keep all that business and those relationships here within the state. So,
well, those are some phenomenal initiatives. I think it says a lot that the state is at the point where it's big enough and busy enough that we don't know everybody who's here. And we're having to actively work to find out who is. That's actually really cool, because it means that this isn't just this little pocket of information that sits in one person's brain that, I know everybody who's here. It's sort of one of the things you have to go through to have a thriving ecosystem, is to then have to build those lists in order to find out, this is actually who's here, which I think is it's a challenge.
Well, I think credit has to be given to certainly the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. They've brought us along as a partner to provide them that depth of industry expertise that they don't have. On the other hand, they have programs like Pure Michigan Business Connect, where that's supposed to be this matchmaking B2B type of tool and program. And so, their focus on MedTech over the last few years, I think, has really spurred a lot more support and interest. And for the first time, they had a pavilion at the MDMM showcase event, and for the first time ever are having a pavilion at the Medica trade show, which is the largest medical products event in the world in Dusseldorf, Germany, each November. And so they've really put quite the focus on the sector. And we, as probably the only other statewide organization, it's sort of a natural alignment to work with them and pool our resources and our knowledge to the benefit of growing, the sector and the industry. So,
yeah, and of course it's really fun when people are like, Michigan was at this show. It's not just, here was a company that happened to be there, but this sense that, hey, Michigan is a place I can go to get this kind of stuff done.
Yeah, wasn't that cool back in April at MDMM?
That was amazing. And then Medica coming up in November. I think you're going to have the same thing at an even
I hope so.
bigger scale.
I hope so.
So very cool. Well, Stephen, I appreciate you taking the time today to do this. Obviously, this is a mini index to September 20th, the MichBio Medical Device Summit, and the recordings will be available here within a couple of weeks at michbio.org. Go check it out, especially if something here today has piqued your interest. Hey, we appreciate all you're doing, Stephen, and thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to share all this. This was fun.
Yeah, always fun. Always appreciate having you. Thank you.
All righty. Take care.
And just a last word, where we're heading next with MedTech Crossroads. The next handful of weeks, we're actually going to be talking about making lists. We have more than 120 hours of content that we have generated over the last couple of years. Most of that content is getting lost. Like, who talked about what when? We're going to spend some time over the next few weeks live indexing what has happened. We're talking about indexing with Stephen. We're going to start doing some of that as well. Also, topics upcoming. We promised that we'd sort of retouch similar topics year to year. Manufacturers we haven't talked about yet in 2022, as well as the higher end venture capitalists, two topics coming up on future episodes of MedTech Crossroads. Also, we want to hear from you. We want to know, what are the topics that you're interested in? What kinds of questions do you want answered? What kinds of panels or groups would you like to hear speak? It's something that we can do, so feel free to reach out. You can always reach out at info@intobeing.com, or you can join us on the show here and pop your thoughts and your questions live, because we'll always leave 30 seconds at the end. If you raise your hand and you've got something you want to tell us, maybe it's a comment on the MichBio Medical Device Summit. Maybe it's a thought about where you'd like to see MedTech Crossroads, some questions you'd like answered. Maybe it's an event that you have coming up. You have an opportunity right now, those of you who are watching live, to raise your hand if you want to tell us anything about that. Feel free to raise a hand in the chat. And our friend Ken Spencer. Ken, it's good to hear from you. You are live.
Yes, thanks, Gene. So it's not our group, but the Innovation Partnership Group at University has Celebrate Invention coming up on October the 13th.
That's great. We'll make sure to mention that on the next show and put a slide up. Thank you for reminding us of that, Ken.
Yeah, that's it's the first time in COVID years, right, that they've had it, right? So it's going to be in a big venue and all that stuff. And there's kind of two events associated with an ecosystem fair and then the main floor where they feature U of M inventions out there. So
that's great.
Yep.
Are they still doing it at the Michigan League, or are they moving it this year?
No, they're moving it, and I forget the venue, but it's bigger. It's a bigger venue.
In previous years, that was definitely one of the must-attend events. So it's good to see that starting back up, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Great. Well, not seeing any more hands, I want to thank you for being with us here on MedTech Crossroads. It's always fun. We're looking forward to a great fall. We're looking forward to these in-person events. We're going to make a point to try to bring these events to you, just so that there's a record of them and a place where that you can come and hear what happened if you didn't happen to make them. And we're looking forward to seeing you next week on MedTech Crossroads. Have a great weekend.